10 matches, 10 minutes. Approximately. What's up everybody, I'm going to try to do something a little bit different here. I don't have a schedule open enough to do a monthly roundup of my favorite wrestling matches, but waiting for a year-end compilation is a bit overwhelming. So I thought as a solution, I could do a seasonal roundup of 5 to 10 of my favorite matches from the current year in a quick digestible format. As the saying goes, brevity begets activity. And by activity, I mean clicks. Okay, no one actually says that. I need to stop wasting time. Maki Ito has been at the center of quite a bit of discourse since her AEW debut last month, and given the fact that it's largely AEW fans coming up with uninformed cold takes about the quality of her ring work based on a small handful of spots, I'd say it's triggered a bit of the inner gatekeeper in me. What's more evident from actually watching her matches in her home promotion is that she's just genuinely great. No, not a meager worker with a great character like many try to argue backhandedly, just a straight up great wrestler. Knowing when to turn up the idol shtick to 11 for some endearing melodrama without going overboard like some bad NXT main event. Her match with Miyu Yamashita from Tokyo Joshi Pro's annual January 4th show is a prime example of this, and probably the best match from Wrestle Kingdom Week altogether this year. Miyu is Miyu in the match, which is to say she's excellent on offense, especially towards the finishing stretch. But Ito's underdog performance, through how much she struggles to earn her comebacks and her exaggerated selling, makes this one of my favorite Joshi matches this year, alongside Kamiyu's defense of the International Princess title against Mirai Mayumi. This was an entertaining blow-off match that effectively transitioned these two into teammates for the remainder of the year. Hey, listen, New Japan fans are down bad in 2021. As someone who's been an avid critic of Bushiroad era New Japan even during its peak years, the calloused and cynical part of me gets a little bit pleased every time I see a die-hard Shin Nihon freak lament about how, oh, the dynasty is over, due to their questionable booking decisions, as if the company wasn't having those for the last decade. Fortunately for them, they still have their monthly big matches from favorites like Shingo Takagi and Hiroshi Tanahashi. But while some super duper hardcore wrestling fans like to unzip their pants, grab a bottle of lotion, and syncopate their hand strokes to the rhythm of Shingo running the ropes, or wax poetic about Tanahashi doing rudimentary square peg round hole preliminary mat work and calling it genius, I find the old, the worn down, and frankly the absurd to be the most compelling part of New Japan by a country mile. Tenzan makes up for being less able-bodied than his contemporaries through some very rough-looking offense and cringeworthy but still endearing pathos. Ohka is no one's favorite, except for mine, but I respect his unwillingness to play into some of the most egregious back-and-forth tropes that plague most matches in this company. Despite the stipulation, it's not much of an Apuestas match, considering Tenzan immediately started doing Mongolian chops again the following month. But considering how much the move is so frequently utilized as a way of concluding the endless monotony of limp forearm exchanges, I can't really complain. Tenzan is by far the best of the New Japan dads, and I will take that to my grave.
Obviously. And Riho, she put a lot of snap on that Northern Lights suplex. Like she might have knocked the wind out of Serena. Oh my God! Both feet.
I'm happy to see that people are turning a positive corner on AEW's women's division. I'm a little more lukewarm on the talent overall, but seeing female talent that typically gets shafted or marginalized be given a healthy amount of praise is something I'm never going to argue with. Like Britt Baker vs Thunder Rosa, I respect for how rough so many of the bumps looked in that match, but to me, Riho vs Serena Deeb remains the gold standard for this division thus far in the company's history. It actually made me feel kind of bad as a relatively big Bret Hart fan, having not seen much of what Serena Deeb was capable of in the past, given how much of an influence he was on her. It's pretty apparent during the match with its structure, as Deeb does a great job of reining in someone like Riho, who, while athletic and able to keep up with almost anyone, isn't exactly the most unique or exciting talent in a leading role. I do wish JR would stop referring to her as the 98-pounder though. I also wish JR would just stop, in general. Hey, listen, y'all like evil wrestling? No, not that evil. I mean like cruel and malicious. Load up Wrestle Universe and watch a Ganbare Pro show. It's definitely up there with Freedoms and Basara for one of my favorite J-Indie companies going on right now. Yasu Urano, who many people falsely refer to as the Genetti in his tag team with Harashima, has a lot of repressed anger to take out on this Chavo Guerrero Jr. lookalike, and let me tell you, he's not too concerned about collateral damage. It starts off with Shota showing a bit of his technical side, but gradually Urano manages to slip control away from Shota and turns this into not the most violent brawl, but definitely the most mean-spirited one this year. Almost laughably so. I hate to say it, but COVID has been quite rough on the lucha scene. CMLL and AAA both had major inactivity and dry spells respectively around the start of the global quarantine, and once they started running full shows again, it took some time before either of them found their groove. As much as I enjoyed Virus vs Soberano Jr. from early February, I feel like an all-time great like Virus, even at his age, has a lot more to offer. Thankfully, Black Terry, at 60 plus years old, is still a world-class talent, and I'm always seeking out more of his matches. What I didn't expect is that the two guys I was less familiar with, Karoui and Veneno, would end up stealing the spotlight in this one. I especially love their exchanges during the early part of the match, and of course, Toxin and Black Terry know how to follow it up with their own brand of violence. I'm not really sure if IWRG should exactly be attracting these kind of crowds, even with a vaccine on the horizon, but it's good to know that the indie lucha scene is alive and well. On a serious note, I actually have a very heavy announcement to make. I am at risk of being typecasted as a Noah guy, and as much as I want to avoid that out of fear of being seen as a biased fanboy, once again I do think that they are the best major Japanese men's promotion this year. I have two matches I want to discuss in this video from Noah, and no, neither of them are from their heavyweight main event picture. There's a lot of stuff I would like to talk about in more detail, particularly the Aggression vs Sugiragun tag from March, which I thought had one of the best finishes to a match I've seen in, frankly, years, despite some rather egregious and cliche moments here and there, but fuck man, I can't ignore Hajime Ohara, that dude is too good, I cannot stress this enough. He's had enough injuries and age-induced wear on him to where it seems the company won't ever make him a singles champion, but you put him in there with a guy like Daisuke Harada and you're bound to have something at least great. He's probably one of my favorite guys to come out of the Toryumon system, and knows how to deliver an exciting and occasionally dangerous junior-style match that doesn't devolve into a rinse-and-repeat cycle of high spots. I'd have liked it if he won, but at this point I've watched wrestling long enough to where I can separate my enjoyment of a match from the booking, and can just watch guys I like do things I enjoy. The other Noah match on my list is one from one of their major shows. Some of you may have watched my live reactions to Noah's Budokan show in February and gotten me and my friends' uncompressed thoughts on the match, but I feel as if the point about Akiyama is worth repeating. He looks far more motivated and interesting in these brief returns to his native company than he ever has doing by-the-numbers main events in DDT. Just the greatest hits with the flattest delivery. Even if he does do some focused work, it's almost always made irrelevant by his opponents as comebacks. Don't even get me started on Kaito Kiyomiya and how much people underrate him. Is he dorky? Yes, completely. He still hasn't outgrown his phase of being the Mitsuharu Misawa Make-A-Wish kid. But since dropping the GHC title to Shiozaki, he's flourished into an incredibly focused and grounded technician, astonishingly under everyone's noses. And that, funny enough, is what makes Akiyama so special. Not popping up from German suplexes and tossing around exploders for a cheap pop, but being mean, aggressive, and tactical, making his teammates like Marufuji act as accomplices in his own arm work. This is a showcase of four guys bringing out the best in each other, and I do hope it leads to an eventual singles match between Kaito and Akiyama down the line. Maybe in the N1 this year, who knows. Oh, hey, we're back with Ganbare, and specifically another Shota match, this time against a guy he has some history with in GENTARO, dating back to Guts World in 2014. Okay, interesting. Gentaro, being probably the best technician on the J-Indie scene not named Hideki Suzuki, is especially impressive considering he had a stroke less than a decade ago and is still able to impress at 46 years of age. One thing about Gentaro you should keep in mind is that you should never attempt to challenge his inner Bret Hart fanboy by locking in a sharpshooter on him. You will get embarrassed. Shota learned this the hard way 7 years ago, and the cheeky bastard tries his luck here again. And what does he get for it? Taunted and maimed by Takashi Sasaki, putting on probably his most motivated non-deathmatch performance in well over a decade. There is admittedly one sequence between Sasaki and Ken Ohka that, I'm not entirely sure what's going on here, but this is still one of the funnest tag matches you'll see in Japan all year, with or without added context.
Oh, look at this! I love it! A powerhouse. Seesaw! Oh my God!
You know, I always found it kind of amusing how people are so hung up on calling cinematic matches not real wrestling, as if the matches in their current format are not a necessary workaround to the limitations of pandemic-era wrestling. Even in the era of the Broken Universe and the Final Deletion pre-COVID, it's still registered to me as worth judging by the same or at least similar metrics as your average bell-to-bell squared circle bout, albeit with proper consideration of the circumstances. And for my money, Sting's first major match since his initial retirement is one of the most well put together cinematic matches since before they became commonplace last year. Beyond a handful of awesome and nasty looking spots, I think what makes this great is how they utilize the space they used for shooting. The abandoned warehouse features several set locations that are clearly interconnected and easy to recognize in relation to each other by the viewer. The ring area, the stairway, and the upper floor. When Sting's baseball bat gets flung up to the balcony, it's the match's way of letting the audience know that once the match moves up there, it'll get brought back for future use in order to turn the tides of the match. None of this feels too heavy-handed or forced either. Despite all my praises for this though, I still think two of these wrestlers had a better match during the first month this year.
As Cage
Many of my favorite moments in the cinematic match from Revolution were set up by Darby's title defense against Team Taz member Brian Cage in early January. I've been very critical of Cage previously. I never really felt that he was a very compelling version of the overdone big man that moves like a cruiserweight trope that was done to death in American wrestling. Thankfully, Cage drops that act and functions as a strict Goliath, which allows Darby Allin to play to his strengths, taking absurd bumps outside of the ring, even some blood, which I was pleasantly surprised by. It reminded me heavily of his match against Walter in Evolve from 2018, particularly with how Darby used his trickery and speed to his advantage, creating a sense of panic and urgency that kept me anticipating the next move and rooting for him to escape the machine. It's between this and the Akiyama tag from Noah's Budokan show for my match of the year so far, but more important than that, what this first quarter of 2021 wrestling illustrated to me is that despite wrestling's global stock continuing to drop amidst the crises in the world right now, and the overall quality of wrestling dipping considerably, you really can't count anyone out. Except for Will Ospreay.